Got it.
No.
Okay. At 7:35, I'll begin.
Yes.
One more minute.
Of a few seconds. Well, might as well, let me see if this is going to change everything. No, it doesn't. It, just takes off that bar. All right. With everybody's permission, I will open the meeting. Good
Okay.
evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Right, yes. Welcome to the May Zoom meeting. There's, some of the old things in transit have been bandied about, such as congestion pricing. I won't talk too much about it, but that's still tied up in court, even though it's supposed to begin June 30th. I won't talk about that. Two little bits of information I'd like to pass along. First, I saw the first 211s on the Staten Island Railway at the Clifton Yard.
Oh, cool.
Right.
Nice.
I was going to my storage unit on Greenfield Avenue in Clifton. As I'm dropping down the stairs, I saw a set of cars with dark blue fronts. I said, nobody else, would have that other than 211. So that's a start.
Excellent.
And we have an update on that catastrophe over in East Palestine, Ohio. The damages have now been levied on Norfolk Southern. They spent $500 million cleaning up and doing all sorts of other repair to the environment and the populace, and they paid the feds $310 million in fines. So that's basically it from me. Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, General Foz. I want to welcome everyone to our May meeting, and a special greeting to all the new members who are with us tonight. Welcome aboard. May your membership in the Railroad Enthusiasts be a long and prosperous one. I'm sure you'll find it fulfilling. And tonight is just another example of why the Railroad Enthusiasts are known for presenting the best in railfan entertainment year after year and month after month. And tonight will certainly be no exception. In the guise of Mr. Frank Scheer, we welcome him back after a very successful and outstanding program back in September, which was a macro view, an overall view of the Railway Post Office, specifically how it operated on the 20th Century Limited. And tonight we take a view of the station on the Shenandoah line of the old Norfolk and Western Railroad, where the library for the organization is located. And Mr. Scheer will give us an in-depth and very interesting and edifying program on that topic. Now, to conclude our membership meeting year, we'll be reconvening one more time next month, our normal fourth Friday, namely June 28th, in the good hands of Mr. Peter Ehrlich, who had to reschedule due to health reasons. And Peter will have an eclectic program ranging from mainline steam in the guise of the 4449, the Challenger. Then he will take us to a very timely topic, Metro North activity, presumably some of it right out his own window where he resides now in White Plains. And finally, we'll be encompassing 3 up-and-coming light rail systems going from west to east. We'll go from Phoenix to Houston to St. Louis. So please be on board with us for that one, for a program that will be much anticipated. So now, without further ado, as previously described, I yield the floor to none other than Frank Scheer. Mr. Scheer, take it away.
All right, well, I certainly
Okay.
appreciate flattery will get you everywhere, and thank you so much for the kind words.
Thank you.
So let me share my screen.
Okay, just before you share the screen, you want me to mute everyone but you?
I'll tell you what, you can do that, or you can just ask questions as we go along, move along. Now, I will mention that the building that's behind me is what
Oh, okay.
the topic of the conversation is tonight. But if you suddenly observe that there's a lot of background sound for a particular person, you might be able to go in and mute that person, but however you want to handle it.
Oh, okay, maybe I'll just, I won't mute her yet.
Yeah, I you know, don't mind the occasional dog barking. I don't mind the occasional cell phone, you know, because if I was in the room with you all, that would be the way it would be. You always have some background sound. So
Okay.
anyway, let me get over here to this screen here. I'm going to share this, and then I'm going to slip into the slideshow view.
Okay,
Let's go
let's
from
see,
the beginning.
intro photo.
Okay. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Beautifully.
Really
Okay.
good.
Now, I had shared there's a PDF file that has notes pages. So there's as much, if not more, information in the notes pages than what you see on the screens. And I'm not going to just read the screens to you. I'm going to talk to them. The notes pages provide everything that I will be saying, pretty much, plus a lot more information and some additional photographs. And even though this is a good distance from New York and New Jersey, the story of Boyce Depot and the extension of the Shenandoah Valley Railroad out of Hagerstown down towards Roanoke and all of that, it was the highlight of the railroad era. So many of the things that I say, you know, are relevant to just about any railroad depot that existed, certainly in the East, as the railroad development continued into the 1910s and thereafter. So we're going to talk about, I've got 6 different topics. First, I'm going to talk to you about what the Shenandoah Valley Railroad was, and that existed between 1880 and 1889. Then it was acquired because it went bankrupt. And Norfolk and Western Railway Railroad was bankrupt as well. But they merged, and the new company titled Railway existed from 1890, and then continued to the Norfolk Southern merger, but I go as far as 1913 because that is when this new depot that you saw a picture was constructed. And then talk about Clark County and Boyce citizens, because the coming of the railroad really represented the creation of many towns and the vibrancy of many locales. And so we're going to talk about what happened in 1912 and 1913, where people came together, mainly 4 people, but they make it sound like it's a lot more than that, came together to provide the funding for the larger depot that you saw. During 1913, it was built. Then we talk about the era when there were agents and clerks at the depot until 1958. 1958 is when the station closed, and then its afterlife from 1959 onward. Try to keep it down to about a half an hour But we'll start out with that first one. So now this is just an imagined view, basically when they built the railroad through Clark County in 1879 and then into where Boyce is now, it was just wooded area, and it crossed a turnpike that went from a ferry across the Shenandoah River. It came through Millwood, which was a very early settlement and a lot of wealth there, and then over towards Winchester, Virginia. So where the railroad crossed the turnpike, this new town called Boyce sprang up. And you can probably find lots of examples of that in many, many different locations around the country. So, why did people want the Shenandoah Valley Railroad? Well, that was because there was one game in town. It was the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad into Winchester, and then further south into a portion of the Shenandoah Valley. Anytime you got a single railroad in that era, this was the era before the Interstate Commerce Commission and a lot of regulated rates, the B&O pretty much had a lock on it and on the traffic, and so people were looking forward to getting some competition. Now, in the 1870s, the original construction stalled, not just for the Shenandoah Valley Railroad, but for many railroads during that era. It seemed like every 5 to 10 years there were financial panics. And around the late 1870s, then a new management and financing spurred the track laying from Charlestown, West Virginia, which is not the same as Charleston, which is the capital of West Virginia, and then southward down through the Shenandoah Valley towards Front Royal. And then, of course, it just continued further south all the way down to Roanoke eventually, what became Roanoke. So the rails crossed the Winchester and Berries Ferry Turnpike, as I mentioned, in February of 1880. And that was, it was all part of a large estate, as were many of the settlements there. There was mostly rural, mostly agricultural. And when you had the railroad come there, then people wanted to start building towns and open businesses and have some manufacturing or other kinds of development like that, not very far from the railroad. So a village grew at that intersection, and when that happened, it was 8 miles over very hilly and muddy turnpike road to get to Winchester. Obviously, you could save that turnpike fee, the time, effort, all those hills and valleys, all that mud, if you just went ahead and loaded your product or received product off the railroad right there at Boyce. So this is what the first station at Boyce looked like. And excuse me, all the Shenandoah Valley Railroad stations had a similar design. They're differentiated by the name written on the end of the building. This is a postcard view. They also extended the size of the building a little bit to add more room for the freight house. But there was a fellow named Upton Boyce who lived on a nearby estate, and that's about 3 miles away from where Boyce was. He ended up becoming the vice president of the Shenandoah Valley Railroad. Now, he's credited with arranging the financial support and taking care of the legal matters of the new railroad. A little different than what you have for most vice presidents. He was really a lobbyist more than anything else. Just a second, I'm going to take a sip of water.
Sure.
Now, since there was never a village where this station was located, it was named Boyceville in honor of that nearby vice president. And although the post office was established on May 31st, 1880, hard to believe that in a few days, that's, 144 years ago,
Wow.
that was named Boyce. So anyway, let me get to the next page. Now, one of the nice things about Boyce Depot now for me is I've got photographers that come through there. They try to emulate O. Winston Link with the night photography. I think this is a very attractive view where you've got the headlight doing some of the illumination of the station building.
Excellent.
Anyway, this was done in 2012 by John Wright. And the southbound trains approaching the station. So the Norfolk and Western completed acquisition of the Shenandoah Valley Railroad during 1890. What happened was the railroad was unable to, after it was built, and this is true for a lot of railroads, they built it and there just wasn't enough earnings from the freight passenger express and mail service to avoid financial insolvency during 1885, and 1885 was a financial panic. So I mentioned every 5 to 10 years, it seems like there was some sort of financial issue. It was a roller coaster. I mean, we talk about inflation now and people not being very optimistic about the future now in terms of growth and the housing affordability and affordability of food. Well, this is a recurring story back in the 1880s. How quickly we forget, especially if we didn't live down during that era and people don't read their history books. Now, after the Shenandoah Valley Railroad was integrated into a larger railway system, so it was designated the Shenandoah Division. There was thoughts that the Norfolk and Western would actually try to either build a new construction over to Washington, D.C., or acquire what was called the Washington and Ohio Railroad, and that later became the Washington and Old Dominion Railroad. It had big plans to go to Washington, to Ohio, but unfortunately, there's a mountain chain there, and they could never get the money to build a tunnel through the mountain. Now, a deep-pocketed or deeper pocketed railroad such as Norfolk and Western, as it was evolving, might have been able to do that, but the solution for that was the Southern Railway came on in and bought that little branch line railroad and operated it for about 10 or 15 years, just to make sure that the N&W didn't get any bright ideas to try to extend into the Washington, D.C. market. The Southern Railway wanted to continue its dominance for traffic going south out of Washington, D.C. into the areas where the N&W operated. So anyway, merchandise and bulk commodity traffic traveled over this route. You have mostly for the Norfolk and Western, if you look at a map, it's mainly an east-west railroad running from Norfolk over through West Virginia, and then at Portsmouth, Ohio, then it branches. One line goes into Cincinnati, one line goes into Columbus, Ohio. The Shenandoah Valley Railroad, and then a line that went south there down into Winston-Salem, North Carolina, were the only real significant north-south connections. Now, there was another one that went down through Durham, North Carolina, but Durham never developed into a major rail center like Winston-Salem did. And certainly Hagerstown, with the former Cumberland Valley Railroad, you had a nice situation that you could get on a train at Boyce, Virginia at midnight in a sleeping car, and it would go up the Pennsylvania Railroad to Harrisburg, get put onto a train that went through Philadelphia and into Penn Station, New York. You could wake up in Penn Station at 8:30 in the morning straight from Boyce. And then likewise, going south out of there, you had sleeping cars that went down to Roanoke, but there you could change and go east and west, and as well as further south, especially southwest towards Bristol, and then down into Knoxville, and then towards Atlanta and New Orleans and all of those other cities. So it was a pivotal location. Boyce was, if for lack of a better term, and maybe an overused term, it was in a real sweet spot. You know, you could go north or south out of there. In my view, if I were to say for those of you who are familiar with Dulles Airport, this is like building Dulles Airport in the background of your major estates. And that's one of the reasons why there was the local funding interest. And so that's what we'll talk about next. There are basically 3 large estates adjacent to the town of Boyce. The town of Boyce is in the yellow, and about where the letter B, where it says town of Boyce, is where the railroad depot is. You can see the railroad track running from the middle left up to the upper right. These 3 estates are pretty significant. We're going to talk about each one of them, but there's a lot of wealth in Clark County and what became Clark County, because some of this, well, all of this is after the formation of Clark County. It originally was part of the county that Winchester was in. So anyway, they were the benefactors of this 1913 depot. Now, we all recall that at the beginning of the 20th century, that's really the railway age. That's why you had the Railway Age Gazette. It truly was the railway age, because route miles, train services, and amenities, they really reached their zenith. Now, sure, you had really nice trains being introduced right after World War II when they were trying to recapture the passenger traffic after the war. Very sleek, modern facilities. But, as we all saw, the railroad passenger and freight service and less than carload service and express service was on almost a continual annual decline. So this first 2 decades of the 20th century, railroads were going around. If you look at any of the railroads radiating out of New York City or out of New Jersey, that's when the really nicest stations were built. It was 1912 for the Grand Central Terminal. Penn Station opened around that time. I'm not sure what the year is right offhand, but they were doing big bucks, and it's not like now where a large company wants the local governments or the counties or the states to ante up the money and provide bonds for them. And the railroads did all of this on their own. So the NNW was improving railway station facilities system-wide, and by 1912, it announced plans that it was going to replace that 1880 Shenandoah Valley Railroad Depot. Now, that wooden depot, if you've ever been in a wooden depot, and just as an aside, I used to work for the C&O Railway during summers of 1971, 72, and 73. I was sleeping in depots when I wasn't working in them on the Richmond Division. They're drafty, they're cold, they've got a wood stove or a coal stove, they've got an outside toilet. Sometimes there's hornets in that outhouse, Now, at least they had electrified all the stations that I was in, but back in that era, you did not have a rural electrification back then, so you had oil lamps, and that would have been what was appropriate for the town of Boyce with its 350 population. These people, the Gilpin, Mayo, and Page families, they were wealthy. They really had it. They were all gentlemen farmers and gentle lady farmers, where they raised horses, race horses. They had money, and so they were not your usual fellow behind the plow doing the back 40. So anyway, they collectively donated $17,500 to the Norfolk and Western. Now, it's not very common that people donate money to a railroad to get a bigger station. They did. And so that, along with that $7,500 budget, transformed the plans from a wood building to a masonry and first-class station, which had electric lighting back in an era when electric lighting was still pretty new. Central heating had a coal-fired furnace down that was cherry red in the winter, and it had radiators in the waiting rooms, and You didn't have coal soot and wood stove smell, in your waiting rooms, and had interior restrooms. Again, a nice feature. You don't want somebody who's wealthy going to an outhouse. They're not going to have any of that. And they also increased the depot lot size because they thought that there might be additional business development. The NNW is very bullish on that. So what we're going to do is talk about these people. The first one is the Gilpin family, which lived on the Scaleby estate. And Harriet Gilpin, Harriet Newcomer, married Harry Gilpin. Hattie Newcomer was the daughter of a bank president from Baltimore. Henry Gilpin inherited a pharmaceutical company in Baltimore. They had oodles of money. And the two moved to a place they called NYRRE, which is about a quarter mile from the railroad depot, and they did that in 1908. So then they bought the land, and they paid as much or the highest amount per square foot of land in Clark County that was ever paid at that time to build this Scaleby estate. Scaleby's a funny name. Kentmere's a funny name, sort of. And the reason is that Henry Gilpin came from England, and the family name came from England, and so they wanted to create references to British land ownership, the manors that were over in England. And Scaleby is the name of a castle over in England. So anyway, that was purchased, and the manor, the main house, was constructed during 1909 to 1911. Of course, the nice thing about Boyce was all that brick, all the other construction materials, that all moved by rail on in between those 2 years. So that was a nice little boost of freight traffic coming into the town of Boyce. And that was all transported by the Norfolk and Western Railroad. Now, Henry Gilpin, I already said that. So anyway, aside from donating money for the new Boyce Depot, this Hattie Gilpin, she loved to give away money. I guess she figured that this was a way that it paved her way into heaven. So she donated a rectory for the Christ Church in Millwood, a parish hall for a chapel in Boyce, and as well as a children's playground in Winchester, Virginia. So she likely influenced the building station design. Now, I've never seen anything about that. This is speculation, but there's no other Norfolk and Western station that was built as stucco on clay blocks. Stucco was very popular during the 1910s, very fashionable. Another thing that she did about that, maybe I'll get into that a little bit later, is she didn't want, of course, this is the era of segregation. I'll be very upfront about that. So you've got a white waiting room, you've got a colored waiting room, or I should be saying, white or Caucasian and black, but anyway, the station, she did not want to have a situation where if she was waiting for a train, that she would have to have the white men using the white waiting room very much. She wanted it sort of for females, So the entry for the white male restroom was off the station platform, as well as for the station employees, such as the agent. You had to go outside to go inside, because there was no inside entrance into that restroom. You had to go out on the platform, which was covered by a canopy, and then go into the restroom. So there were little things like that, little touches. It suggested to me that Hattie had a lot of influence over the building station design. Peter Mayo on the Powhatan estate, a very interesting fellow, again, very wealthy. He married into one of there's a term in Virginia called the First Families of Virginia, the FFVs. And the Burwell and the Carter family, they go way, way back to the colonial days, and they're well heeled. So anyway, he married into that family, and he had after the Civil War, after Richmond had been decimated, because after all, when the Confederacy retreated from Richmond, you've heard the song, the night they drove old Dixie down, and basically the Confederacy was evacuated by the Richmond to Danville train down to Danville. It was a government on the roll on a train. Anyway, after Richmond was decimated, and then it started getting rebuilt after the Civil War, he had, I guess his father had been involved in the tobacco business, and so he came in and reestablished tobacco manufacturing in the city of Richmond. Tobacco back then, nobody knew the health effects of it. It was commonly used. It was a very high value commodity. Railroads loved it. It was a high value of service rate that the railroads charge. So anyway, he was wealthy, and then later on he sold out to Continental Tobacco Company, which later then became that. If you ever heard of Lucky Strike,
Yes.
the American Tobacco Company, that took over that Continental Tobacco Company. So he had big homes, good lifestyle, spent half his life at the hot springs of Virginia to take care of some health problems that he had. He ended up dying in 1920, but he's the kind of guy that you could walk into a railroad office and say his name, and because he brought all of that freight traffic wealth to the railroads after the Civil War, when he talked, the railroad managements listened. And so anyway, he was very influential, and I've never been able to figure out, of the $17,500, how they divvied up the contributions. It could well be that Peter Mayo actually made the largest contribution of all, and then did all the negotiations with the railroads. So he influenced to get a first-class station building, and then he also influenced the Gilpin and Page families to go into a better facility with him. So the last of these is Robert Powell Page. Saratoga is an estate. The house there still exists, and it was built by Hessian soldiers that were captive. You talk about slave labor. Well, that is built by slave labor, but it was Hessian soldiers who were prisoners who built the house. And he was also married into this Burwell family. This is it was all a lot of nepotism going on there. And when they're all linked together like that, the Gilpin family was sort of the outsiders because they did not intermarry with all these Carter and Burwell families. They really listened to him, and that's probably the inducement. Now, mainly his main contribution, as much as anything else, was providing the land. The estate where Boyce Depot, where it was increased from a half acre to 2 acres for the depot lot, that was all part of the Saratoga estate. So went ahead and, it could have been that was the arrangement, that he donated some money, but mainly he was coming up with the land that the Norfolk and Western wanted for a better station. And they also owned another farm to the west of Boyce. The Page Brook Farm is still there, and Page family descendants are still around Boyce. We'll talk now about the station and construction. And again, this is one of these things that no matter what railroad you're talking about during this railroad age, you'll find a lot of similarities from architecture and design. And that's, I think, very interesting. They're not identical from railroads. Each railroad had their own style. Now, what the N&W did is they had, for a first-class station, they had basic specifications as far as what the station with size and appearance would be. they left it to the contractor that was going to build the building to actually make the actual architectural drawings. I wish I could find architectural drawings for Boyce Depot. They don't exist, but a year later, the station at Charlestown, West Virginia, was constructed. It has a very similar appearance and design. It was instead of clay block, it's brick, but you see all the same features in terms of spacing, size, all of that. And so what I've done is looked at a lot of the drawings. They're about, out of the original drawings, there's maybe about 5 or 6 that exist that show certain details. And that's what I've relied upon for this portion of it. Now, I want you to take a close look at that. One of the nice things about this depot is when a train goes by it, you don't feel any vibration in it.
Really?
That thing is like a rock. And it's because all those dotted lines that are below the ground level, concrete foundations are going down to limestone bedrock. There's a lot of limestone in that area. And unfortunately, that makes it very expensive. If you decide you want to have a basement in Boyce, Virginia, you got a problem because you have to have a jackhammer in there to break up the rock to be able to excavate out that area. And in this area, it was all hand labor. I can't imagine what it took for getting that accomplished. But anyway, so you got concrete footers that extend down onto limestone. Houses that are 2 or 3 blocks away will vibrate more than this station will. So really, really nice. So anyway, the new depot was built on the Page Banning lot. Now that's next to the original Shenandoah Valley Railroad station. What they did is the original station continued to operate while they were building the new one just up the driveway a little bit. And that land, as I mentioned, came from Robert Page. The original layout for Boyce did not really have a house track very well. They had to get an easement behind a mill to try to get to a place where there could be a public team track to load and unload box cars or other freight equipment. So they fixed that on this larger lot by having a spur come off, and then it ran around behind the depot. And all the leveling of the depot lot and building structure was done by a company called John P. Pettyjohn of Lynchburg. John P. Pettyjohn apparently had basically an open relationship with N&W as well as some other railroads, where if you needed a roundhouse, you needed other stations, you needed sidewalks in the city of Roanoke, whatever it was, they just they did not do, as I see it, a lot of competitive bidding in that era. The standard price for a first-class station was $25,000, which, by the way, if you translate $25,000 into today's dollars, you're talking about something just a few dollars short of $1 million. And the construction methods and the kind of wood they use and other building materials and the hand labor, you could not build that station for anything less than $2 or $3 million now. But $1 million equivalent back at the turn of the 20th century went pretty far. Anyway, so John P. Pettyjohn built a lot of things. They also built water tanks for the N&W Railway. Yeah, you name it, they built it. So anyway, the construction was believed to have been completed by October 1913, and then during November, that's when they moved stuff out of the old railroad station into the new station, did some finishing touches, and probably sometime just before Thanksgiving, it opened, and then they later demolished the old wooden station. This is one of those vexing problems for me, because I'd like to think that then you go to the local newspaper and there's a big to-do article making news that, oh, the railroad station opened today, and they had a band playing and all of that. Well, apparently they didn't do that. It was a long time coming, but the actual date, the first day that the station was open, is not known, and apparently was not captured in newspaper records. So anyway, when the station opened, there are 350 residents. You've got a station that's 26 feet wide by 141 feet long for 350 residents, a first-class station for 350 residents. And that's deceptive. People coming on into town, it would make it really look like that place was up and coming. But again, it was these three estates that really drove the bus, if you will, or drove the train. So anyway, when it was open, in 1914, there was this little narrative that you can read some other time, because I do want you to get the PDF file that I sent that has the, excuse me, let me get some more water. That has the note pages and some additional photographs. But anyway, so this tells about it. This is about what I could find in terms of narrative about the opening of the station. But again, it does not give a date. So now, a station is not a station if it doesn't have agents and a clerk or other personnel there. This is the layout from the 1950s of how the station sort of laid out, but it was a nice little sketch, so I threw it in at this point. And you have what happened was, in 1955, the town moved its post office into the main waiting room, which is that larger room that's on the right, that's 24 feet wide, 24 feet long, and 24 feet high. Almost a perfect cube inside of a building. You can see that there's no entry between the larger waiting room and the smaller waiting room, and then there's no entry into the baggage and express room, but there was from the baggage and express room into the freight room. Freight room is where you had less than carload freight. So, and where that show up in the upper right-hand corner of the sketch, it says men's toilet. Then the women's toilet was the one that's on the bottom lower right, on that right side, and what they were calling as a record room was actually the women's retirement room. It was not uncommon for women's restroom facilities of that era, no matter what railroad you're on, for them to have their own separate little room where they could sit and not actually be out in the waiting room. And then if they needed to use the restroom, they could very discreetly go into the restroom without anybody seeing them actually go in, because of course, women do not have bodily functions. So anyway, the responsibilities of a railroad agent operator, we think of that, hey, they're selling tickets for passenger trains. Well, that's not just the whole game in town. And it was filled by seniority, just like a lot of other jobs on railroads. And this is true for all railroads. That position was filled by seniority, assuming the person met the qualification requirements. Operator meant that they were a telegrapher, and during later years, that requirement was relaxed, and the person used railroad telephone communications to facilitate train operations. That when I was working summers on the C&O, I was fortunate because I never learned Morse code. But, everything was telephoned by them back in the 1970s. So at Boyce, there was probably a good reason why there were only 4 agents in there. And it took a lot of seniority to get in because, first of all, it had large express company commissions from fancy stock. Fancy stock, if you never run across that term, that's horses. That's not cattle. That's not sheep, goats, poultry, or anything like that. Fancy stock is horses, and particularly race horses. And I will say that the commission for handling racehorses, because you had those gentlemen farmers there, they were sending their horses out to the racetracks. All the horses that went out to racetracks in this era were transported by railway express. They were transported in cars that looked like what they were baggage cars, but they were horse express cars. They set up with stalls, a place for the hay, and usually there was also an attendant who rode along in the car to make sure that the horses didn't have a problem en route. You know, they were expensive shipments, and expensive shipments translated into a big commission. I believe that some of the commissions from one shipment was more than what the railroad wages were being paid by the Norfolk and Western. So, you know, if you were going to go out and look for a station to be agent at, handling just this one express shipment, and you get more than what the railroad was going to pay you for an entire month, that's pretty good. And by the way, that's a wage that's based on 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, you know. So there was also a clerk assigned during the 1910s and 1930s to perform station accounting and tariff filing. So smaller stations, the agent operator had to do all that themselves. Having a clerk there take care of filing tariffs, doing the billing, calculating demurrage, all of that kind of stuff, really made the agent more like a supervisor, and they could just focus on the telegraph traffic or supervising the express shipments or less than carload shipments or carload shipments that were going in and out of the station. So it was a manageable workload for a small community and a comfortable work environment. You know, you were not in a little wooden building someplace. You were in a town that had all the basic features, had a grocery store, had a couple small restaurants, you know, had some gas stations back as cars started coming on the scene. So, you know, it was for a rural community, it was pretty up and coming, and it was comfortable. And 2 of the 4 agents actually owned homes in Boise. One, I think, rented. I can't find any other records that they actually owned anyone. And then another one, I'll talk about that later, came up from a different estate about 7 miles south of town. No, our first agent was Morris Dunlap, even though it shows 1913 and 1929. That's not the years that he lived. That's the years that he was agent in this new railroad building that still exists. He was actually agent at Boise probably almost 10 years, if not 15 years earlier than that. So at Boise, he probably had the longest tenure, but in the building that was constructed, he was only agent for about 16 years. And by age 19, he was a scrappy little fella. He went out and actually had a station created at Ripon, West Virginia, and became the agent operator there in 1886. So he was recorded in the 1905 list of NNW agents and officers, but he went back earlier than that. You know, he bought a house in 1896. So 1896 is probably about when he actually moved into town. Now, he was doing fine until 1929. He had a stroke, and he lived in town, and that's where he died. So, you know, tragic end. Few months before the stock market crash, things were just booming along in the 1920s. He was living the good life pretty well. And the nice thing you all have to recognize, when you're the agent operator in town, you, aside from the mayor, and some agent operators ended up being the mayor in town, aside from the mayor and maybe the post office postmaster, or the bank, if there was a bank president in town, you were the one who knew everybody in town. You knew everyone where they were going because you handled all their tickets. You knew who was marrying who was divorcing who, although divorce was one of those things that wasn't talked about back then. And you know, you knew everything about everything. When the shipments came in for less than carload or carload freight, you know, somebody ordered a piano, you knew they had a piano. So, you know, it was like, and of course, all that was confidential. They handled the telegram traffic. They were sworn to privacy for handling that telegram traffic, but they knew every word. You know, they transcribed it or they sent it. Um, so they knew everything about everything, and so it was a great career back in that era to be agent operator. You know, there's never been a job like it since then, and probably never will be, in my opinion. Anyway, so he was a member of the town council. A little bit of politics there, and also served as the town recorder, which is like the secretary, and as a council member. So he was a real everything I've read about him. He's just a nice guy, you know, and very accomplished, very well respected. That's everything that you want in a railroad station agent. Now, Thomas Sheets came on in. He came because it was seniority was, and it was a very, very good station to get into. Thomas Sheets took over when when Morris Dunlap died suddenly. He was at Charlestown and he was hired in 1891. He had a varied career. He was part of the time he was a train dispatcher, and then, you know, back then, train dispatching by telegraph with a lot of trains, high pressure job on a single track railroad. He couldn't take it after a while, and he just shifted back to going. He went back to the agent telegrapher roster for positions that were less stressful. So I don't know if he have almost had a nervous breakdown or what, but you know, it's much easier. You can't imagine how much responsibility there is in the train dispatcher now. A computer does it all, and the dispatcher has some responsibility, but not like that. You know, when you had to keep track of every train, rely upon OS reports, as they were called, into the stations to show where a location of a train was. Sometimes you made a mistake. Sometimes you had a collision. That was just the end for you, literally. Some have gone out in the hallway and committed suicide.
Really?
So anyway, Mr. Sheets's life ended tragically in 1932. Whenever I'm in the agent's office, I think about Mr. Sheets because he collapsed onto the floor in the agent's office. And he was taken to a doctor's office in town. Now, back then, you didn't have emergency rooms, you didn't have hospitals, not in a little town like Boyce. The doctor had a house. They had a little office sort of in one of the rooms of the house or next door to the house. He was taken there. And he said, oh, well, you know, he was feeling a little better and wanted to go home. And then he went home and he died later that evening. The reason what he had was it was called acute indigestion on the death certificate. And acute indigestion, that suggests to me that he had a perforated stomach and the stomach acid was leaking into your internal organs. If it's big enough, if those acids are good enough to dissolve the steak that you just ate, then it's obviously going to do a number on your internal organs. So they didn't know. What a painful way to go, you know. Anyway, so he was there only for about 3 years, had the shortest tenure of Boyce of the 4 regularly assigned agents. You get to this fellow here who had the longest tenure, at least inside of the new depot. This is an interior view of that depot. It's very uncommon that you could find interior views of a depot because you had to get a professional photographer. They didn't have flash photography, no cell phones, no Instagram, no TikTok, no nothing, you know. And so he's posed at the desk. He probably paid the photographer to come on in because he had, again, an official position in the town of Boyce. There he is. He's got a jacket, he's got a tie on, you know. He's dressed as a professional. And so anyway, and just one other comment about that desk and the chair and the cabinet that you see to the right and so on. All that wood carpentry was done in the carpentry shops down in Roanoke, Virginia. Norfolk and Western did not buy standard desk furnishings from you name it, Rooms to Go or anything like that. You know, they made all their own wood. That's solid wood.
Wow.
That desk is as big as a king size bed. It's a part- you know, it doesn't look that big in this
looks-
office.
That looks big.
You try to put that into a room in a house, it fills up the room. So, and that chair was made by the NW, and they
good.
stenciled it nicely, Norfolk NWRR or NW Railway. So the calendar on the wall is a slightly different color. Unfortunately, I don't have the original photograph, but I managed to get a very high resolution copy of it, for which I'm grateful. And you could tell that it's 1934. Over in the middle of the windows behind Mr. Lane, you know, it's actually showing the date. So you can pin down the actual date that this photograph was taken. Again, for something that doesn't have a caption on the back, you know exactly where it is and so on like that. So my only regret is he didn't have a view taken from the other side so that I could see what was out of view on the left side of this picture. But anyway, that's Mr. Lane, Mr. Lane. And then the last agent was Lee Murray, and he had been agent at White Post, which is the next station down south of Boyce. And then when Sylvester Lane retired in 1952, he became the agent and stayed there until the station closed. He was not much younger, although he was the youngest of all the agents at Boyce and had the second shortest assignment. You know, he was no spring chicken. He was the youngest, but he was pretty old. And so by 1958, he was ready for retirement. The railroad was finding that operating the station at Boyce, Virginia was a money-losing proposition. It required maintenance that was expensive and operating costs that were high. So they decided, and plus that you know, the telegraph traffic, railway express, and less than carload freight, that was all evaporating, you know, almost on a daily basis. There was just less and less. So with all that diminished revenue, the NW petitioned to close the station, and they decided to set the date as the office would close on effective January 1st, 1959. So the last day the station was open was December 31st, 1958. And Lee Murray took the job with him because he retired on January 1st, 1959. The nice thing about December 31st, you know, one of those things, you know, you talk about things made in heaven. My birthday is December 31st. I
Oh,
turned 7 years old that year.
wow.
So little what I know as a 7-year-old that someday I would own a train station. I was in Lionel trains, but never would I have ever dreamt that I would own a station, or that there'd be this railway mail service library or anything, or all of that stuff. So we'll talk briefly about a clerk named Arthur Lowe. He was clerk from the 1913 to the 1940s. Now, I don't know when he stopped being clerk at Boyce, because he continued to live in Boyce and he shows up as a railroad employee because his wife was the Chesapeake and Potomac telephone agent and ran the telephone exchange. But I think what he did is he used his railroad pass to go down. I know that he was in Bassett, Virginia, which is south of Roanoke, big furniture manufacturing. location. And I think he was clerk down there for a while. So I
Oh,
don't know when they actually trimmed back the clerical staff or having a clerk at Boyce, but I go ahead and say 1940s just to cut a little slack there.
excellent.
And it took about all that, took care of everything, the tariff filing. You can't imagine, unless you've been a station agent, just how much work there is in the course of a day. You think you're sitting in a station all alone and there's no trains coming. Oh, you got another thing coming. You are working on paperwork, you're working on way billing, you're working on your accounts. You got to order freight cars. That's
Yeah.
all the clerk does. It helps to, plus that, if you have to write a letter,
Oh,
he's a
I gotta do a
stenographer.
pencil. Ah,
So he's going to go ahead and transcribe the letter that you're writing without the agent having to type it all up. So he died in 1961 and lived at 127 East Main Street, which just happens to be right behind the station, and is owned by the Railway Mail Service Library Foundation. That's where the new Railway Mail Service Library will be constructed on a lot behind that building.
Mm,
So this is the depot afterlight. That's a nice picture of a Norfolk Southern train heading northbound.
nice shot.
And this is an old
Yeah.
Winston Link kind of photograph,
Mm,
I also probably by John Wright. Now, that White House that's over on the right, it faced the tracks. You're seeing the side view, and they've sort of got it now where you enter from the side instead of towards the tracks. But
oh,
that was the section master's house back when you had the railroad divided into maintenance away sections, and all he had to do was walk out his front door and he was at his job. So they probably had some other section house for motor car there at Boyce. I can't find any record of that. The other thing that was at Boyce was a stock pen that where you see the train there, and then you see the bushes that are directly in between the house and the train. You go back about 300 or 400 yards, and that's where there was a lot for loading cattle. So trying to find other uses. So just so that you know, well, it was, did I skip over a slide? Okay. Between 1959 and now, the town post office was there until 1983. And in the meantime, there was also a fish charity, which is where they collect clothes, and you can go in if you've had a disaster or you're in poverty, you can get some clothes. They had a Clark County Supply that rented the back room, the freight room, to store hay and farm equipment and so on like that. It was cheap warehouse space. So anyway, what's really happening now is that the Boyce Depot was acquired by the Railway Mail Service Library in 2003. And then when I mentioned to you earlier that I have prostate cancer, I set up two foundations in 2017, one for the Boyce Railway Depot Foundation and one for the Railway Mail Service Library Foundation. That's my estate planning to make sure that the collections and this depot are taken care of when I'm not around to do it. And, we're building a base of volunteers and people who are interested that can provide financial support as well. So anyway, the Boyce Railway Depot Foundation is a transition plan from private ownership to public preservation. What we'll do is the foundation and the assets they will manage are going to be, it really reflects the town's heritage and history. And what it will do is it'll have rooms that can be rented for weddings, receptions, or private parties. It'll have a display in there of the railroad history, probably in the agent's office. The freight room, maybe I can convince some model railroad club to come in there and put a layout in. We'll all see, but that's basically what's going to happen to the station now and into the future. So
Great.
It was incorporated as a
Thank you.
501c3 nonprofit Virginia corporation, and the idea is that there's this other building behind that 127 East Main Street, which is the telephone exchange building that's behind the railroad depot. That's owned by the Railway Mail Service Library Foundation. The lot is owned by it. It's gone through about a $250,000 transformation in terms of site preparation and improvements for a building that'll eventually go up and then move everything out of Boyce Depot and into there. So while the Railway Mail Service Library collection is in the station, eventually it's going to go out of there, and then the station will be used for other purposes. So, and then the Boyce Railway Depot Foundation to be responsible for the repairs, maintenance, improvements, and ownership expenses, which it's not cheap owning a station. It's about $10,000 a year.
Wow.
You have to pay for the town taxes, property taxes, for both, even though it's nonprofit, you have to pay taxes on that to the county and to the town. You have to pay, you have to cover Norfolk Southern's requirement for a $2 million liability policy.
Yeah.
Norfolk Southern owns the land under the depot, so you have to pay an annual land rent, which right now is right around $3,000 a year.
Mm,
It all adds up, and then you got utilities like electricity. The water and sewer has been temporarily turned off, as well as the heat, because in the wintertime, nobody's really there much anyway, and just the propane to keep the part of the building heated was running several years ago at about $3,000 just to keep the building at 60 degrees.
Wow.
So because it's got 24-foot high ceilings, you have to use radiator heat to heat that. You cannot rely upon forced heat and air conditioning. And for that reason, it's really not a suitable building for an archival library. You need proper heating and ventilation.
yeah.
So there'll be other purposes, maybe the foundation or other people who want to put in some sort of HVAC can go in and do it, but that's already on top of that would be on top of the $10,000 a year. That's a little bit more than what the foundation can currently chew. So these are the things that I just mentioned, what the possibilities for its continued use are. So now I'm making the pitch for the Boyce Railway Depot Foundation. If you want to become a member, even though you're far away, if you like what you heard, you can support it. But if not, if you're ever down this way and you want to find a rail fan place for watching trains that nobody's going to chase you off the property. And also there's a webcam there. I don't have the web link real handy, but it's in that Railcam USA, whatever it is. It's in there. You could find Boyce Depot. You can watch trains virtually at Boyce. There's cameras there. They have sound. You can hear the train going by. Also, there's a radio feed at the station for the voice channels for Norfolk Southern. So, there's a lot of ways that you can enjoy Boyce without actually being there. And, if we have periodic events, we hope that you'll try to visit them if you're in the area. All I ask is because there's not somebody there every day, if you think you're coming down this way, make the trip worthwhile by providing advance notice.
Yeah.
A few days notice is sometimes usually sufficient. A couple of weeks notice is probably even better. If there's a conflict, then we could talk about alternative dates, but then that locks that in. Because I live in Alexandria, that's 70 miles one-way trip to get over to Boyce. And I do that every week, 70 miles over, 70 miles back. The other volunteers are coming down from Hagerstown, Maryland, and from Williams, I'm sorry, near Williamsport, Maryland. And,
Oh.
so we're all driving long distances, not like we just live next door to the station. So
Oh.
that's the membership application. That's in that PDF file. And there's also a
Great.
book that I wrote for children called The Big Station That Did. You get that pretty much as a member. You join, you get that book. If you want to buy extra copies to give as a gift, well, that's fine. We take care of that too. And so now it is question time. And so if there's anything that you'd like to talk about for Boyce Railway Depot or anything else, railway mail service, railroad related, hey, let's have at it.
Okay. Let's hear questions.
What highway is it near? What highway would one take to get there?
Okay, so Interstate 81 runs north-south, and it's coming out of, well, I guess most of you know where Interstate 81 is. Anyway, the nearest exit is Winchester. You get off at Winchester and you go about 7 miles to the east and you get to Boyce. Boyce is, for those that are more familiar with the primary route highways such as US 50, US 17, US 340. It's right along US Highway 340 and a few miles from a junction of 340 with US 50. So it's easily found. If you take the address here, this Boyce, Virginia 22620, put it into your GPS, you can find it real easy.
Oh.
I'm real easy to find. Boyce Depot is real easy to find. And I think Boyce has broken into about 600 population now, so it's almost nearly doubled what it was at the beginning of the 20th century. But as you can imagine, if you've only got 600 residents in town, this is the biggest thing in town, literally.
Wow.
If you want to jot down that information, that's good contact information. That's in the PDF as well. And by the way, that's a nice little express messenger safe that's by my left leg in the photograph. And some other cabinetry. The interior woodwork is beautiful. It really is. And for a station that hasn't been used as a station since 1959, when I was 8 years old, it still has, it looks like a station inside. It was a restaurant for a while, but they did not modify it substantially. In fact, they did some fixing up and they improved the electrical power and amenities like that. So it's in great condition. It does not, some stations you go into, it requires $1 million just to get in the door to renovate the place. This does not require that. It's got a few ceiling plaster places where there was leakage in the roof. The roof's been completely replaced. And so those leaks no longer occur, but you need to get up there and fix some of the plaster. That's really about all that needs to be done. It's a very presentable station inside and out, and it's been completely repainted outside.
Well, that's important.
Yes, go ahead. You had your hand up.
Ever think of landmarking it as a landmark status?
Well, the don't need to do that because the town of Boyce applied for what's called a historic district.
Oh.
Historic district, you have contributing structures, and the railroad depot was a contributing structure. Now, here's something curious about railroads. If you didn't know it already, railroads don't want anything on their property to be a historic landmark.
Yes.
That's an anathema. So, haven't done that, don't need to. It's historic, whether or not there's a plaque on the outside of it. Maybe I'll try to get a plaque down by the roadside, but that would be right in the middle of a driveway, and placement of where that plaque would be wouldn't it's already mentioned in another plaque near the volunteer fire department that it says the town retains its beautiful depot, whatever the actual wording is. So it's mentioned in there. But as a member of the historic district, so there's other houses and structures within the town of Boise right around this station that are considered historic, and this is just one of them. So no, it's been considered. It's also something that I've stayed away from. One of the things you learn when you get into a relationship with a railroad is you don't rock the boat.
Yeah.
Or you don't rock the flat car. Okay. You is if you pay the rent for the land,
Mhm.
you let sleeping dogs lie.
Oh, yeah.
Because here's the thing about that land lease. It can be canceled on 30 days notice.
Oh,
Yeah.
Now,
Sounds
it's
familiar.
been that way since 1955.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean that next year they couldn't do it. Originally, the whole reason for buying that building next door, that 127 that I was mentioning, where the library is going to go, was to have a lot that if the Norfolk and Western suddenly decided, hey, you got to move that station, you only got 30 days to do it. Of course, if it came down to that, they give you 30 days notice. They're not going to come in with a bulldozer on the 31st day and knock it down because it's your property, even though it's your responsibility to get it off the property. But after you had this lead in there that Norfolk Southern was what $500 million for this. They had that derailment in Ohio. They also don't rock the boat in terms of stirring up public hornet's nest in terms of publicity. So,
Oh,
if you've got a reasonably good structure, you think you can come up with the money, you got the willingness to move it, you got someplace to move it to, you got a plan. That's the thing, you got a plan, then they'll probably work with you. And you could probably even get the railroad to kick in some money towards the move. Just, railroads are famous for trying to make problems go away. And
Right.
one way that you make problems go away is money.
oh,
But that's what they do with all these other fines and everything like that. They're just making problems go away. It's not there
Right.
because they love you or the community or whatever, They just
I know.
make it go away.
It's a business.
So, any other go ahead. Any other questions? Paul?
On a typical weekday, how many Norfolk Southern freight trains go by the Boise?
Oh, well, that's one of the nice things is that for those of you more familiar with this railroading in this area, there used to be Potomac Yard near Washington, D.C. It was the world's largest interchange yard. You had 6 railroads going in there. Whatever was brought in by one railroad was taken out by a different railroad. Now, as you had railroad consolidations, that was no longer true, and so also, the Hunter Harrison kind of thought logic about wanting to get rid of hump yards and let's go to flatbed switching, which I think that was ill reasoned too, but I'm not going to get into current railroad operations because sometimes I don't know enough to really sound intelligent. But anyway, so they closed Potomac Yard, an enormous amount of real estate that they put a strip mall in there and houses and all of this other stuff. So they closed that railroad yard. Instead of Norfolk Southern taking the trains into what had been Potomac Yard, they stop at Manassas with the freight trains and turn to the west, going over a branch line that used to go all the way down to Harrisonburg, Virginia. But then it goes as far as the place near Front Royal, Virginia, and then it turns north and comes up through this line, going up through Boise, up through Hagerstown, and then up to Enola Yard, the main yard for the Pennsylvania Railroad near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. From
Yeah.
from Enola Yard, you go east, west, and north. You know, I mean, it's a major hub. So they it used to be that there were only about 3 or 4 freight trains a day on the N&W, and then a couple passenger trains. Passenger trains have all gone. Now you've got something closer to about 20 freight trains a day
Oh,
going by
okay.
the station. Now there's some lulls in there where you don't see any trains for 2 or 3 hours. Next thing you know, they're fleeting trains. You got one right after another. So
Mm.
this is where if you're familiar with ATCS, Advanced Traffic Control System, where you could do monitoring, you get the radio signals. Now that's
Oh,
all being
yeah.
phased out. All that signal communications is being put onto fiber optics. As soon as it does that, it all becomes dark territory for rail fans in terms of being able to use ATCS to see where trains are and
Yeah.
what's going on. But
Scan
for
it.
now, for at least another year or two, you know, while they're getting into this is all the positive train control stuff that's going on. For now, you can have that on a laptop. I get rail fans stopping by there. They got their laptop open. They got the radio on.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
they know as much as what the dispatcher down in Atlanta, Georgia knows. They're sitting right there, and it's rail fanning made easy. All of us, when we were younger and rail fanning didn't do that, you either 5 minutes too late for a train that
Yeah.
just passed, or 5 hours too early for the next train that's going to come. You know, it was one way or
Doesn't
the
it
other.
always
You
work that
never hit it
way?
just right.
Yeah.
Or if you
Innovate.
did, you were really appreciative. But now it's the people with the ATCS and the voice channels. It's down to a science. They know exactly where to be on a track, you know, and well, get themselves positioned for any photography they want. Now you got drones. You know,
Oh,
fly
yeah.
overhead, take your aerial photographs. Used to be you have to hire a helicopter. You know? What a difference the world, and digital cameras. You know, I
Oh,
mean, digital,
God.
gee whiz. If I had a digital camera back in the 1960s, I can only imagine the pictures that I could have taken.
Mm.
You know, all of us. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Thanks, Frank.
that's the official program. Unless there's other questions, we'll talk as long as you want. Yes, okay, Sheldon.
Okay, there's this poor stationed agent who died of acute indigestion. I remember reading in the Staten Island history there was a borough president in 1922 who died of acute indigestion.
Oh.
I
Yeah.
forgot his name at the moment.
Mm.
It's, you know, I'll tell you what, we are so, you know, I don't use terms that are overly used, but truly blessed about the healthcare today. Now,
Yes.
care, maybe some of us can't afford these fancy procedures that they come up with. The doctors, you know, prescribe a procedure. Suddenly your insurer says, you know, you can't afford that, you know, but gee whiz, there are diagnostic. First of all, I've got prostate cancer. I already mentioned that. I would be dead now
Oof.
were it
God
not
forbid.
for the drugs that I'm taking to keep it moderated,
Mm.
and if it was not for the kind of early detection that you get, you know. So I had a friend in New Jersey who she had a ping pong ball sized tumor in her brain,
Oof.
Oh,
and didn't know it for 2 years. It just kept on growing and growing and growing, and suddenly she became incoherent and just not making any sense. And good thing she got to the emergency room when she did. In
Oh,
another era, she'd be dead. You know,
absolutely.
we all recognize that the times that we're living in.
Yes.
What was it? Victor Hugo said it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, you know. We're pretty lucky to actually be alive right now with the prospects, at least as far as healthcare, of, you know, if you can outlive some of these diseases long enough, not necessarily get cured, but at least manage them long enough that maybe there's something that's going to come along that's going to make your life a little better and extend it a
Yep.
little longer.
Mhm.
Yes. Thank
So
God.
that's the sermon for today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay,
That was an
Thank you.
excellent presentation.
Thanks for
You're
the
welcome.
show,
Thank you.
Frank.
Oh,
and
yeah.
just a preview of coming attractions. I mentioned to Paul and Stephen that I have a presentation that talks about exactly what station agent operators did and
Mm,
clerks, so if there's a time later this year or we get into 2025, God willing, that you want
Good to know.
Yeah,
to go see that, that's fine. The thing is, doesn't make any difference whether it's Lackawanna, Erie, Long Island, Pensy, New York Central. Doesn't make any difference what railroad you're
same
talking about.
job.
A railroad station agent did essentially all the same things. So, it could be pretty relevant for any audience and certainly for you all. So that's just
Absolutely.
something to keep as a possible invitation. I'm willing to do it. And,
Thank you.
otherwise, I'm going to get my blue jeans and blue shirt back on and go to work at Boyce Depot next Wednesday and
Excellent.
keep the party going. So, and this
Thanks,
is me.
Frank.
Well, I actually put a tie on every so often. So that's my background.
That's
So
a
make sure
classy
that the
picture.
make sure that the PDF file gets around.
Okay,
Yeah.
what I think there
I
were
hope
two
Steve will
PDF
email us.
two PDF files, I think that you did send, I think on May 7th. Should the distribution just be to those who got
Who
the
attended.
who got the invitation to this meeting? Because generally we have
Well,
the
I think
Zoom
you can
link.
send it to anybody. I don't.
I could,
Oh,
if you want,
excellent.
I could send it to everyone. I could send the PDF files to everyone, every RE member with an email address. I could do it. Send it even
Sounds
further.
good.
However you want to do it is fine with me. But I
Okay.
think the wider audience, even if they couldn't attend, they can read through it. They don't get to hear my lovely voice, but they
Well,
get to
we-
they get
I-
to review
we
it.
did
They get
record
the
the
background
presentation.
information.
Yeah, the
Okay,
presentation is
so
recorded.
sometime
too.
this weekend, I'll just mass distribute the PDF files.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, and then I'll be uploading the recording sometime this weekend,
Value added for the membership.
early next week. Okay,
Value added.
right.
There
value.
you go.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
the operative
Okay.
term.
And thank you
Thank
for your
you.
comment, Gregory, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you for your nice
being a great
presentation.
attentive audience.
Yes.
Thank you,
excellent.
Frank, and good
Thank you.
night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Very nice
Have a
presentation.
happy and healthy Memorial.
Happy Memorial Day.
Memorial Day.
I
Don't-
second that emotion, Paul.
Right.
Happy
Absolutely.
Memorial Day, everybody.
Hey, stop
Happy
the recording.
Memorial Day.
Stop the
Yeah.
recording.